YouTube, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca, and in today's video, we are going to continue the Back to Basics series. The Back to Basics series is designed to help equip new quilters, and those of us who have been doing it for a little while but want to refine our skills, become better and more efficient quilters. The topic for today's video is only about rulers. That's all we're going to talk about. And it's not a topic that I had originally planned for this series. However, after I uploaded the rotary cutting system video, which I think was video number 2, I got a lot of requests and recommendations from all of you asking for a video specifically designed on how to better use your rulers. So here's the hard part. Everybody's ruler system is a little bit different. That means the markings that are going to be on your ruler may not exist on other rulers. The rulers that you get from Fiskars versus Creative Grids, Missouri Star, Fat Quarter Shop, everybody's system is a little bit different. So what we're going to cover are only those bare minimum essential markings that you're going to find on just about every ruler. Hopefully that'll give you enough information to understand what the ruler should be telling you and apply it to the rulers that you have or want to buy so that you can use those a little bit better. Now, before we go too far, I want to cover 2 things. Thing number 1, if after watching this video, the ruler that you have still doesn't make sense to your brain, try a different ruler. There are far too many rulers out there for you to struggle trying to understand what that ruler is telling you. Get one that makes sense to you. And secondly, the term ruler and template I tend to use interchangeably, although a ruler is typically something that's really going to help you make a variety of different shapes, and a template is designed to make kind of just like one shape. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, these are examples of templates. I've never used them. They still have the brown paper backing on the back of them, but when I peel that off, these would be perfectly clear. But these are designed to make only these shapes. I really am not going to be able to use these to do anything else. I'm going to be able to make a Christmas tree and a house. A ruler, on the other hand, is going to be just that. It's going to be an acrylic piece of plastic that is going to have a series of markings on it that is designed to measure and cut fabric. And you're going to be able to use this a variety of different ways to cut blocks, triangles, strips, all of those fun things. If I didn't say this in my last video, I just want to reiterate it now. There are a ton of rulers and templates out there, and you can collect them all. There is nothing wrong with having all of them, other than you may run out of space. But to get started and for your day-to-day quilting, you really only need that one ruler that's going to allow you to square up your block, cut your strips, subcut your fabric, and all of your basic cutting needs. And for me, that go-to ruler is a 6.5 inch by 12.5 inch ruler. Now, I prefer the Creative Grids 6.5 inch by 12.5 inch ruler, but that's because the marking system on those rulers makes sense to my brain. You get the one that works for your brain, but I think that that one you're going to find is going to be the most versatile ruler in your entire arsenal. So I can sit here and talk about rulers, but if you're anything like me, you're a visual learner. And so flipping the camera around, putting it down on my mat, and showing you exactly what I mean is probably going to help this really solidify in your brain. So let's flip the camera around, let's look down at the mat, and I'll show you some basic tips and tricks for reading your rulers. Okay, so we are brought in nice and close on our Tula Pink 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch square ruler. And the reason why I'm using this ruler, honestly, is because the lines are black and they're going to show up on the camera a little bit better. And she's got some markings in between her 1 inch lines that are going to make it a little bit easier to explain what I'm talking about. The marking system that I'm going to show you in this ruler is pretty standard for just about every ruler you're going to use, and I'm going to demonstrate that in just a little bit. Let's learn how to read this ruler and then take that information and see if we together can read a couple other different ruler brands. So the first thing that we need to know when we're looking at this ruler is what are the whole lines that are running edge to edge, either top to bottom or side by side, telling me. You do that by looking at the number that is on the line. In this case, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's telling me 2 things. Thing number 1 is that this and this and this, as well as this line, this line, this line, and this line. All of those lines that are running edge to edge are measuring a full inch. The second thing that it's telling me is that the inch marks are counting from the right to the left and from the top to the bottom. So this is my 0-inch line and this is my 0-inch line. That means that this ruler is intended for somebody that is going to cut along the right side of the ruler. That is typically going to be somebody who is right-handed. Okay, so now that you know what these lines that are going edge to edge represent, let's talk about these little markings that are on the ruler between each of those big lines. Okay, now that you know what those solid lines that go edge to edge are telling you, now you need to understand what these little ticks or dashes are representing between those solid lines. And in this case, I know that most rulers are going to try to mark off every 1/8 of an inch between whole number to whole number, and that is the case here. It's marking off an 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, and 7/8 between each of my whole inch numbers. And it's trying to help me visually identify an 1/8 of an inch versus a 1/4 of an inch by making the sizes of those dashes a little bit differently. Now that's pretty common on most rulers. The 1/8 of an inch is the smallest mark, and then the 1/4 and 1/2 inch marks are usually a little bit bigger. On some rulers, though, they'll have 3 dash sizes. The 1/8 of an inch will be the smallest. The 1/4 inch will be a dash kind of a little bit bigger, but not necessarily the biggest. And then the 1/2 inch mark will be the absolute biggest. Okay, so that's kind of the basics for how to read the general markings of this ruler. I've got a little piece of pink paper that we're going to pretend is a piece of fabric. We're going to demonstrate how to use this ruler to actually measure off some fabric measurements. So let's say for this piece of fabric, I want to get a piece cut that is 2 inches by 3 inches. I want it to be 2 inches side to side and 3 inches from top to bottom. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is lay my fabric down on my table and put my little ruler over top of it. Then I know that I want it to be 2 inches side to side. So I'm going to look for the 2-inch mark on my ruler and line up that line on the edge of my fabric. Now, I tend to do this so that the black line is directly on top of the fabric. So if I were to push it even just a hair, it would be too far in, and that just gives me a little bit of flexibility with my seam allowance. You just want to make sure that the black line is not next to the edge of your fabric. I don't know if you can really see that, but do you see how there's a teeny bit of white poking up here? This is not quite 2 inches. That's going to hurt you when you're sewing this stuff together. It's going to eat into your seam allowance. So I like to pick it up and I like to set it down so that I can see the pink poking through, and I just slightly push it over very slowly until the pink goes away. And then I usually know that my black line is right literally on top of the edge of the fabric. So now I know that I am 2 inches in. I know that from here to here, that is 2 inches. Now I need to do the same thing to get this to be 3 inches. Right now it's measuring a little bit more than 3 inches, almost about 3 3/4 inches, because I've got 1/4 line here. You can't see it because that one's pink just because of the way the ruler's made. This is the 1/2 inch mark, and then this is the 3/4 inch mark. So I need to push this ruler down very carefully until that black line is right on top of the bottom edge of my fabric. Now, if I were to take a rotary cutter and cut from bottom to top and then from right to left along the edge of that ruler, this piece of fabric would measure 2 inches by 3 inches. Okay, so that's how you would measure your 2-inch by 3-inch fabric. That's actually really easy because it's whole numbers. Where I find people tend to get confused is when you have to measure an odd number, like 2 1/8 by 3 3/4. Well, go back into your arsenal and remember, how do you identify what 2 1/8 inch on this ruler is. You look for the 2-inch line, and then you look for that 1/8 inch tick mark to the left of that 2-inch line. And so in this case, it's right here, it's right here, it's right here, and you can't see it right here because there's a hole in the ruler. But I'm going to line up my fabric so that it's on this mark, and this mark. There we go. And now I want to measure 3 3/4, so I'm just going to slide this ruler down to this third large mark on the line between 3 and 4, and you can't see the big one here because of the way the ruler is designed, but it is actually this one. So if I go down to that line, if I were to cut from bottom to top and then right to left, I would actually have a piece of fabric cut at 2 1/8 inch by 3 3/4 inch. The other area where I think people tend to get a little confused is when they're working with 1/8 of an inch. I think most people can figure out how to work with 1/4 inch or 1/2 of an inch, but the 1/8 of an inch really tends to mess us up a little bit. But let me just break it down for you a little bit further. When you're working with an 1/8 of an inch, it means that you're going to count every single mark between the whole lines that go edge to edge on the ruler. So for example, if you're looking for the 5/8 inch mark on your ruler, you're going to start with the first tick after your whole line and count down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there would be your 5/8 inch mark. If you were looking for a 1/4 inch, it means you're going to count every other line between the whole lines that run edge to edge. And so if we were looking for 3/4 inch, we would count down 3 every other mark. So the way we would do that is we would skip a line, count the first one, so this would be 1, skip another line, count the second one, that would be 2, skip the other one, and the third one would be right here, and that would be our 3/4 inch. Now, if we're looking for the 1/2 inch mark, there's only one 1/2 inch mark, and it is directly smack dab in the center between this line and this line. That's your 1/2 inch marker. And in fact, some rulers, when they're doing their marking system, the line for that 1/2 inch marker will actually be a little bit bigger than even the 1/4 inches because they want to visually draw your eye to this is the halfway point. So that's kind of the basics for reading your ruler. There is one other thing that I do like to point out. A lot of times ruler manufacturers, not always, but they will do a frosted or colored edge along one or more sides of that ruler to indicate a seam allowance measurement. And so sometimes it'll be a 1/2 inch, sometimes it'll be a 1/4 of an inch. To identify what that is, all you got to do is look at where it's lining up on the ruler itself. So I know that my 0-inch line starts from the top here because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is my ruler measurements there, and I can also see it over on the side. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's little teeny tiny pink dashes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 dashes before I get to that solid line for the 1, so I know that this is a 1-inch square going both right to left and top to bottom. This shaded area that I'm talking about, the line for it actually stops on the 1/4 inch mark. There's an 1/8 of an inch and then a 1/4 inch, and that's where my shaded inch marks. So if I wanted to take a piece of paper and measure to see if I've got a good 1/4 inch, or maybe I wanted to mark a line for a 1/4 inch, I don't have to worry about trying to line this up or find the measurement. I can look very quickly for that frosted edge, line up the edge of that frosted part of my ruler, mark, cut, whatever I've got to do. I know that this whole colored area of my ruler is 1/4 inch. That's basically all you need to know to read a ruler. What does the colored edge tell you if there is one? What are the whole lines measuring? And how can I identify the 1/8 inch, the 1/4 inch, and the 1/2 inch markers between those whole lines? That's it. Once you understand that, you can take that knowledge and apply it to other rulers. Looking at the Missouri Star ruler that's laying in front of you, it's the same thing. I have lines that go from edge to edge. And I have little marks in between those lines that go edge to edge that are signifying 1/8 of an inch along the way. On this ruler, the 1/8 of an inch is the smallest mark, the 1/4 inch is a slightly bigger, and the 1/2 inch is a pretty big prominent mark right smack dab in the middle. Now, if you're looking at this ruler and you're looking at the numbers, you'll notice the numbers for this are oriented a little differently. If this were laid out like the Tula Pink ruler that we just had, we would expect this to be a 1, this to be a 2, but instead this is the 1 and this is the 2. And that's because this ruler is really intended to be used for left-hand folks, so you would use it to cut along the left-hand side and then the top instead of the right-hand side and the top. I don't know if Missouri Star designed this to be a left-handed ruler, but I don't see very many of these where the measurements start on the left side instead of the right side. So in my mind, I think this is probably a good tool for a left-handed quilter. If you are a left-handed quilter and you need some rulers, I would reach out to Missouri Star. Rulers in general are pretty easy to use, but they can become a little overwhelming with the information that's on them when you have something like this. This is a Creative Grids ruler, and what can be a little overwhelming with Creative Grids is there are a ton of markings. And the reason for that is you have some numbers that are facing you and some numbers are facing away from you. They do that because the ruler is actually designed to be used for two different purposes. The white numbers represent whole inch marks, and the black numbers, when you flip it around, represent the 1/2 inch marks. So when I have the black numbers facing me, that very first solid line actually does not represent a 1 inch mark, it represents a 1/2 inch mark. And then the next whole line, which is 1 full inch away from this, actually represents 1.5 inches. And then the next whole line, a full inch away from that one, represents 2.5 inches. When I flip the ruler around, those black numbers are now upside down, so I need to ignore them and not use them for measurement. I should be using the white numbers for measurement. And that first full line, not the full dotted line, but the full solid line, represents 1 inch. The next one, which is 1 full inch away from it, represents 2. And the next full one represented here is 3 inches. And those are all measurements away from the edge of the ruler, not from each other, obviously. All right, so that's the basics of how to measure your fabric with a ruler and cut. Let's do a little test together. Okay, we're going to go back to the Tula Pink ruler because this fit nicely in frame and I feel like there was less markings on it. But let's do a test together just to make sure that you understand how to do this. I'm going to call out a few pieces of measurement and it's always going to be side to side, top to bottom. That's the way I'm going to call out the numbers. So if I were to say 1 inch by 2 inch, I mean over 1, down 2. That's what I'm looking for, right? I'm going to give a few of those measurements and we're going to use this pink piece of paper as our pretend fabric. And I'm not going to say anything after I get it. I'm going to line the ruler up on the fabric and let's see after if you would have lined up your fabric the same way. I want to measure from this piece of fabric 1 inch by 3 inches. Are you ready? Going to measure in 1, down 3. Would you have done the same thing? Now I know that this piece of fabric completely under the ruler is 1 inches by 3 inches. Let's try that again. What about 2.5 by 3.5? Over 2.5. Down to 3.5. Cut here. Would you have gotten the same thing? What about 1 inch by 1 inch? Over to the 1 inch line, down to the 1 inch line. Would you have done the same thing? Let's do one more. What about a 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch square? over to 2.5 inches, down to 2.5 inches. Would you have done the same thing? So I hope that was helpful. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to teach you how to use something when I'm not exactly using the same thing that you might be using. But the idea here is to give you enough information to understand what basic pieces of data the rulers are giving you so that you can wrap your mind around how other rulers work. And if the one you have doesn't make sense to your brain, go look at other rulers, look at pictures of them, handle them at your local quilt shop, go to Joann's and play with them. And if you can pick it up and look at it and it makes sense to your brain, then maybe you need to switch to a different brand. That's all I've got for this video, guys. I really appreciate you following along in the Back to Basics series. All right, guys, that's all I've got for this video. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys all in my next video. Bye!